So let's just go straight into this one. I'm afraid it might take a long time. I understand from James, I understand your aversion to photo references. Now, I don't mean to be quite that guy. Photo references are perfectly useful at different times for certain kinds of picture making, and I particularly the imaginative painter. But still, I don't particularly want to be labeled as this guy who hates photo references. But for teaching purposes, for talking to students, we're talking about something pretty important. Managing uh, your first job is managing the look of nature, becoming a translator into the second dimension of the third dimensional world, right? The three dimensional world. But he always says, could you address the logistical issues of painting in natural light without photographs? In this example, that shadow, and he's looking at that picture where I was correcting that Mary's work. There's a shadow cast on the wall by the sun coming through the window. And that shadow is going to move across the wall and be out of the frame in an hour or so. Never mind all the changes of shape, by the way. A landscape might be more forgiving, but any natural light impression is going to be gone by evening. I can imagine how Cézanne or Monet could finish most of their pictures in a couple of hours, but the kind of work you and the Boston School painters do must take many days or weeks. I know the story about John Sargent dragging his models out into the garden every day at exactly the same time for 2 summers in a row to complete Carnation Lily Rose in just the right light. But even he couldn't do it all the time. Do you make sketches and color studies and work from them as reference? Uh, do you try to get the key visual order spots down and do the rest from memory? Now you're talking about something useful. Or is there another way? So if I'm doing imaginative work, I would do sketches and color studies and use them as a reference. I I should have actually brought a picture in that I was using. That I've done that with, but it was strictly an imaginative painting, and I've changed actually everything in it. But it's that's again the problem is the imaginative painting world. The Oyster Gatherers of Calais by Sargent or the El Jalejo are both done from color studies, value studies, gesture studies, figure grouping studies, and then pieced together into a sky, a beach that looks like it might have been painted from life itself and it's totally separate from the rest, maybe even as a setting for it. And there's just an awful lot of truth in the notes. But I'm going to just walk through these pictures I have here, and let's just talk about the various uh, uh, impressionist issues. I do want to say again, remember, I'm talking to the student of painting from life, the person who's trying to figure out how to translate, how to paint what you see, because it's the base for everything else you do. So don't think that I'm taking a position where I hate this and hate that, and everybody must do this or it's wrong or any of those. The world is a big place, and I was speaking to one of my students and not so long ago, and who said, "Don't you think that there are many ways to the same place?" And you could argue there are many ways to the same place, except that what do you mean by the same place? Uh, so my sense is that there aren't best practices to get to the same place. If you're an impressionist, for example, you do require that naive eye. You do require the ability to separate stuff from effects and learn to be objective about playing with effect and effect relationships. And you're not going to get to the same place if you draw all sorts of things with outlines and then start to color in stuff and call it effects. It's not going to give you the same results. And your motives will have been different the entire time, undoubtedly. And so your motives will affect the results, right? So you won't get to the same place. Well, I may be complicating that unnecessarily, but let's just look at pictures. And again, Cézanne is not a useful comparison. He isn't even trying to do this. I mean, to some extent, he says he is. And I recommend highly this book called In Defense of Art by Christine Herter, who was a friend of Gamel's, student of the Boston School, but guys around when Gamel was around. And but read that book in Defense of Art if you want to understand more about Cézanne. It's a way wiser book than I've seen by anybody else, and nothing in modern writing is even beginning to be close to it. It's written from the point of view of a painter, and rather an impressionist painter at that, at least impressionist training. So, but when you get to Monet now, you look at these pictures here, and what you're dealing with is um, uh, a person hitting notes at a particular time of day. I'm going to go to the lower one first. You can see this cut right here. He doesn't have it up here. He doesn't have it here, and he doesn't have it down here. He has it there. That's a very short window, isn't it? So he's chosen that spot, and that's you're in the right direction when you say, would you have to secure something like that rather early? Once you see what the design is, and you realize you want this much with this much stuff there, which might take you the second day to realize it, but that's going to be a fixed place. That's going to be one of those things when you know exactly when everything is exactly right. Keep remembering that when you do this kind of a painting, you are actually, you see the one above you, it's even more noticeable that you're in exactly a moment of light. It isn't paintings of buildings. So the subject is light is a very reasonable approach to take to talking about this. Even here, it may seem less so because this looks an awfully lot like the stones and all those sorts of things. But it's not a painting of a rock wall as much as a painting of color relations, all of which are happening in relation to a rock wall that gives you results that are strongly evocative of a rock wall. And of course, the point to which you push these things is probably dependent on how much you want the rock wall to look more and more and more like a rock wall instead of beautiful color relations in the atmosphere that they're sitting in. By the way, notice while you're here, the clouds floating around. This comes up later on too, but these things these are freewheeling effects. You can use these as they come and go. One spot may have been just sitting over here. Another time, this may have been cutting off this. This little cloud may have been cutting off over here, making a strong point. But they're there for use, right? They're floating all over the place. You have no choice but to use them as you can. They don't hold still for you. And there's no reason for take a photograph. It doesn't require that. But in a setting like this, there isn't a lot of shift in the sky, probably, if I know those kinds of days. They're typical of New England, these sort of hazy, milky days. It'll sit like that for a fair amount of time, but the sun shift won't. In other words, the moment of light when this thing is that kind of red, this one is that kind of red. These things, they're like that for a brief period, sometimes as much as 20 minutes. But I don't think as much as I've painted trees or whatever, I've seen anything last like that when the sun has gone to this lowest level that lasts more than 20 minutes. So if you're looking for the unity of the day, right? You're in that 20-minute window. You know that when these things are right, all the rest of these things are going to do that. You're going to play the games to these things. So these notes start making a lot of sense that this note and that note are very definitely related and all those sorts of things. I'm saying too much. So let's just talk more about this. Do I need photographs? None of these were done from photographs that I know of, by the way. This is very Monet-like. These three are all Tarbell, and this shows you the way he would start a painting. You can see that in the foreground of this one, and in that too, there's something like shadows, right? Or even the time of day. In all these, there's a time of day thing because you'll see the sun hitting and casting a shadow on our side. So it's coming back through these guys and hitting here. So there's a right time of day for all these things. You could argue that some of these notes won't change very much individually, and you may be able to spend more time with those but you never take your eye off of the grand ensemble of the visual, the unity of the grand ensemble is what I want to say, of the visual impression. And so the same thing is true here. So he could have easily painted these trees, and it rather does feel like he painted them at a different time and drew them rather an awful lot because he just had too much time on his hands, maybe. I'll show you a Sargent in a little bit where it suggests that he's trying to do something similar where he doesn't take the time. But in any case, what you're saying, though, is that this shadow line is going to move, the line of shadow of the trees. Now, a great deal of this thing might not change much in the course of an afternoon, sun moving across. Certain parts of these effects won't change dramatically, so you might have more time than you have on others, and you'll learn to use your time wisely. Yeah, fleeting effects, but you still put yourself out there for maybe an hour in a day, maybe a little longer, depending on whether it's a gray day. This whole story about Dennis Miller Bunker, he would go out and paint in Medfield on gray days or hazy, significantly hazy days because he could stay out there for 3 hours and nothing would seem to change. He doesn't begin to get the magic of these sunlights in those, and the one where he's got the little white house, which I didn't show here, with the brick chimney sparkling with sunlight, is obviously done with a way more of a fleeting brushstroke. So You might argue that those are some of the limitations of this kind of work, that you're not going to be caught up painting leaves. And that's your choice, right? That's one of the reasons you pick this, because you're actually having more fun with the color light. I could say the color of light or the light of color, but the whole thing about color and light is going to be, it's where you see the beauty, where what's evoking the charm of the visual setting. It isn't the fact that there are little girls sitting on benches, or this is my sister, or my daughter talking with her friends, or any of these things. It isn't that. Even though these things get to the point of being virtual portraits with all the stripes and all those sort of things, and the accuracy of the faces. But nevertheless, let's just go on. Um, there's nothing stopping you from painting uh, in just any number of ways. You'll find those ways just by being outdoors a lot. But if you're deciding you're going to do an articulate, draftsman-like copy of the nostril, you know, in this kind of a setting, you're probably barking up the wrong tree. And if you take a photograph of it, it's going to look like you did a photograph. We're trying to do this and get a photograph. They just don't meet. Now, I got to requote the Ang comment when he said that the color and drawing really don't belong in the same picture. Rather, and now it's an abusive quote, but he's saying you really have to watch out that you don't think that way. And that's one of the problems, actually, even associated with Gamble himself, is that he and Paxton, is that they seem to somehow think that they could have this outline drawing with an element of noodling, and actually then borrows a little bit of the colors, or borrow a lot of the colors, the impressionists, and get similar results, but they fight each other. And that you need to understand. That you really do need to understand. What do you really want? So if you're a storytelling person, and you're trying to tell a story, then you'll probably sacrifice some of what we're talking about here. But if you're an outdoors eyeball, who just sees the magic of the color relations in a setting producing this quality of light, uh, then you're not going to put your time into noodling up little tiny things like the curls around the hair or the eyelashes or anything like that so many realists seem to want to do today. This is a different world. The music is made out of a different thing, right? So it's not line and form, although they're all here in a limited way. I mean, this is a beautiful line, right? Or you can argue there's various aspects of form in any number of these things. Even this has a beautiful sense of roundness. But what we're talking about now is just simply the idea that when you go outdoors to paint, the clouds aren't going to stay here. You're going to have to pick something. So one moment you may set up with these things, and you undoubtedly will. I certainly do. When I go outdoors, I set up with these major points, and I've showed you in previous ones. I've showed you the same exact types of locations of major effects to form top and bottom of a setup, and significant points and effects. Yes, that's exactly what you would do, James. You have that down in your mind. But if you want to get a photograph in this thing, you get a different model of what this kind of painting is trying to accomplish. And don't try to do everything in every kind of picture. Again, so you'll set up these things, get them strongly stated. You'll have major proportions working pretty well. And all of a sudden, a set of clouds will come by. You'll drop everything you're doing because these cloud relationships suddenly deliver something to you that you think is going to make a pretty cool design. So you see the woman already has the hat going this way and whatever is happening. And look at the ground down here. So he's already building on this line, right? Isn't he? So here come the clouds plowing through, and he says, "Wow, that's look at that." And so he actually puts some time in massing the major masses and finding the big color relationships and getting some element of the angles created through whatever some people call structure is out there, but masses. So again, that's fleeting. Gamble used to refer to this when you talk about hair as I hope I didn't say this already. I had a false start in this painting, in this enterprise here today. But he talked about the movable feast, which everybody knows from Hemingway's writings. But the movable feast is the hair. For example, if you're doing a portrait, the hair will change from time to time. And you don't get an attitude and have the woman spray her hair down so it never moves for you for the next 2 weeks. You simply, or the guy, but you simply paint. You just watch the changes and you look for things that are going to work well with your composition, with the underlying composition that's already established. And it'll be much the same out here. So you're wanting this to happen. You want some of the accidents to happen. On the other hand, a whole lot of what's out here is predictable. This can come back again. I'm talking about the general effects, and the shapes may be different. And you may find, oh yeah, and you got to have a willingness and ability to, by the way, to move things. That's one of the difficulties of with a lot of people is they want to fix the drawing. You really have to fix the effects, what creates the effects, and then be skilled at maneuvering those things into better locations and playing better games in relation to each other. Anyway, but here you have a Benson doing the same thing, and he would go out there and he's got a sky full of stuff, clouds, whatever. He may have some indications of all these things, but he's primarily setting up with this big, beautiful note here, the darkest dark, and all these sorts of things. And a number of them, are negotiable. I don't know when he put in the umbrella. It looks like she's got. Does it look like she has two umbrellas? What am I looking at here? No, she's pulling back her. That's a strange thing on top of her head. That's a funny hat. Anyway, but so he's got an umbrella and the woman in combination. That's probably his basic thing. And then he knows he's going to be having to build with clouds and that sort of thing. But you'll see that in a game like this, the abstractions, the blue play and the blue play and all that sort of stuff, that's actually our game. It's a color blob game, if you want to call it that. We call it spotting, but it's the spotting of colors. And there's always the indication of drawing to whenever you have high contrast, bony ridges and those sorts of things. And the play between all those elements is always there. But you don't need a photograph for this. I mean, what about this thing has to be that exact or exacting? It's only the modern problem is the photograph, is the mentality of the photograph, much more than the photograph itself. I'll show you what I mean in a second. Now, the efficiencies that are associated come out of the watercolor world, in my view. At least when you see Sargent doing it, you see that he's in the order of strong, right? He deals with strong, important players early and often, you might say, right? That's a classic case of something to draw and how much you shouldn't draw, right? But if an effect like this comes by and there it is doing what you need, then you have to get onto it right at that moment. And if you have to come back the next day because you didn't resolve it, well, learn to resolve those things earlier and more quickly. But Sargent knew where to work and where not to work, and that's a kind of a big deal. The blurred eye tells you that, by the way. Keep remembering that. If you blur your eye, you'll see effects. You'll see spots like this, contrast points, this thing, this thing. Keep blurring your eyes. You'll see this over here. Well, you'll certainly see the color mass of this, and so on, right? You see this. But blurring your eyes, and what you're going to say is, so these are the players, and you can get your head around them fairly quickly, but bunches of them will move. And again, if you think of it as a movable feast, you'll say, let them move. When they move, I move, because chance, for example, the shadow cast here, it could have been cast further over here. It will be 2 minutes from now. So you'll use those things for design and not be upset about it, etc. I only show this one because it's another example of here's a cloud, and do you think it sat there? And again, though, the beauty of this kind of work is in color and light. Don't get the wrong idea. That's what it is. And oops, didn't mean to do that. There we go. And this one here is a nice example, though, of what I was saying about the moving target. This is obviously painted, and I'd say very, very frequently, Sargent looks like he's painting fast. He's getting right to the point. But in a spot like this, you may very well be painting fast. These are all cast shadows off of these trees. This light is coming, looks like over his shoulder. Wouldn't be surprising, based on what I see here, if that's his own shadow right here. So again, if you blur your eyes, you know who to spend time with. You'll know that probably these effects are going to last longer. You may not have to spend early time with them. These effects may not last very long. So it's the glory of this chroma and these key effects that if you set up your colors, as Monet does, and then pull off these key effects, you're going to be able to manage this scene and get out of there safely. Yeah. So this one is in the Zorn. I'll show you on the left, and should have probably shown you a Sorolla. Both those guys. Sorolla's father was a photographer, and there's some of his outdoor scenes in the sand appear to have been photographed. I don't know the extent to which Sergeant Zorn may have gone out there with tracings and then painted from life for the color. It's entirely possible. I mean, these little girls running, you aren't memorizing that kind of stuff. So if you're really thinking that these guys never used photographs, or if you're thinking I'm thinking that, you'd be wrong. Nevertheless, at the end of the day, those things wind up being, in a sense, more important because of their story, if you want to put it that way, or at least the story has taken over a little bit. And he found that the only way he could get the kind of drawing he wanted was through some other devious means. There's no question at all. This Zorn, and Zorn worked a lot from photographs. Um, there's no question that Zorn is painting, and famously, by the way, with a limited palette. Which, if you're painting, if you're really trying to get the beauty of the color relations out indoors, I'm sorry, outdoors, in a setting like this, you'd need a wider palette, a range of colors. But nobody's going to sit there on a rail car and have these several models sit there in a row for how many hours while the sun sat here doing exactly this one thing. There's no question in my mind that's a photograph. Whether you should or can't or won't or whatever, you can't teach that to students. You're going to need to get something like this and ask the model to sit there and have the light coming in through the north light. There'll be some other light. Anything else could be back there. It could be a lamplight even. This doesn't appear to be that, but it could be, or just some other window. In any case, that's the place to teach a student to hit notes, get color relations, and to learn the order drawing, the drawing order. This one's by Tarbell. I don't know what else to say about it, except this does appear to have a fleeting effect. Appears to be north light here and some strange other light here. Not significantly successful in my view, although at the time it was painted, it was one of the viewers who was a painter bragged about it as being one of the most astonishing daylight nudes ever painted. So I've never seen it in person. I have no idea why he would say that. Uh, so, but I think that sort of covers it. Let me go back, as I said I would do, to your quote. Let me go all the way back to the beginning. To your question, do you make sketches and color studies? Now, again, that if you're trying to do an imaginative painting, you do color studies and sketches. You always do try to get the key visual order spots down and do the rest, not from memory. I don't know of another way to do it, but you will do it. Not you won't be doing the rest from memory, but you'll be doing it in a more cursory way. One of the things you have to learn to do in our way of working is to do rather what we call accurate generalizations. And so there are many passages in paintings which I could go to where you're doing that. One of them might be, for example, in the water, Monet's water in either case here. He's not actually out there drawing this one and this one and this one. You're not going to be able to do that. So should we take a photograph so we can get all these things in a row? Should we trace the photograph and then do this kind of color onto it? It's kind of like the extreme end of what you're actually asking, but it will set you up to be doing an entirely different kind of a painting. And again, I say the photograph is what's screwing us up here mentally. You don't need it. This is primarily about texture. When you talk about the visual play, this is texture. This is texture. This is texture play. So it isn't about how many leaves there, how many leaves there are on the tree, or how many cupping, uh, 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 whatever wavelets there are on the water. That's not what we play with. We play with visual phenomena. So when you see brokenness plays to brokenness, and there's varieties of levels of those kinds of things. That's a whole different world. It's a far more abstract world, and you don't need to know the realism. That's just James. That would be my one primary point to you. Just watch out for realism. Realism will eat your lunch. I would say if you're trying to understand the difference between different kinds of work. I know there's that story. I think it was Raphael. He said he wanted the drawing of Michelangelo in the color of Titian or something like that. Ang essentially corrects that and says you aren't going to get both of them. Don't even think you can do my kind of drawing on a piece of stained glass. And people did try to do that and have done sort of interesting things that way, but you can't even begin to get the beauty of that kind of drawing. It has to be done rather the way Ang did it. Okay, Sargent dragging his models. I think I've covered this. And so this is just for you, James. If all the rest of you cut out, I wouldn't be surprised. So I would suggest the main thing is really to watch out what your motives are, right? Make sure you understand that you need to have rather simple motives, right? Now, when you're a painter, when you're a student of our kind of painting, what you need to do is set up things and keep doing it for a long time. Know what's paintable, what's within your means, what's within your reach. Keep humble about all this sort of stuff. There's so much beauty everywhere. You don't have to go out and do exotic things like having sun moving across the wall. You don't have to do that, especially to learn to paint. But there's beauty everywhere. I remember a guy was teaching his students cinematography, and he's asked them to go out and do some shooting. And he said, But you can't leave the premises of the college campus, and which is a very small college campus. And so these kids had to, and they did, made really nice videos of just stuff that was within touch, within reach. Nobody had to sit there and fantasize about this and that. It's a little bit like that, you know. There's so much beauty within reach of the impressionist, of the guy who, you know, it's going to be setting before you, isn't going to move much. You have to be aware of what the range is within you, which you can maintain that visual unity, and learn to work with that. But watch out that you don't want to try to be all things to all men or all things in all pictures. Okay. All right, James. Thanks very much for that question, and wish you all well in your efforts. Do comment, share, subscribe, all the above, and see you next time.